So this is why you subscribe. Turn on the bell for the notifications. You don't know when we're going live, especially to talk Ohio State football right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Happy to be joined by these three. From the top, we got Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove. We got Tony Gerdeman on from Buckeye Scoop, and also Steve Hellwagon from 247 Sports. Bucknuts. Gentlemen, how you doing today?
Doing great.
Doing well.
So Kevin had mentioned to me when we first jumped on that I got a little sun today. I think we're all getting a little bit more sun these days. I got some myself, so that's always a good thing. So we appreciate you spending at least an hour here outside the sun to maybe cool down a little bit and talk some Ohio State football. All right. These players are going to be outside the athletic facility here at some point, popping pads and putting themselves at risk as they do, even under normal circumstances. It's a dangerous sport, but much was made, Tony, of the COVID-19 waivers that have been signed by Ohio State players. And I got to admit, as I did to all three of you, there were assumptions made by myself, and they were backed up by a number of people that I talked to that aren't necessarily the case. So just kind of run us through what these players have signed and agreed to.
Yeah, it was originally put out there as a liability waiver, and the title of the actual document is Buckeye Acknowledgement and Pledge, and nowhere in here are the two words liability or waiver. Basically, it's part of the education process that Ohio State talked about when they revealed their plans for reopening campus buildings, and a lot of that was getting the players to understand, all of the student athletes to understand their role in keeping the coronavirus out of the buildings. And, you know, some of the things on this pledge that they did have to sign in order to play athletics and to take part in their sports is, you know, if you test positive, you agree to quarantine. If you'll be monitoring yourself for fever over 100.4, or if you've got respiratory symptoms or a sore throat or a headache or body aches, you're just open and honest with the medical staff for whatever sport you're playing. And so it's just saying that, yes, I will do these things. I will get a flu vaccination. I will stay home if I am feeling sick. I will practice physical distancing as much as possible. I will wash my hands. I will keep my personal space and shared common space and my belongings clean. This is the liability waiver that is being signed. And it says here, you know, at the bottom, it's like, I understand that COVID-19 is a highly contagious virus, and it is possible to develop and contract COVID-19 disease, even if I follow all of the safety precautions above. So they're telling you that they want you to do as many things as you can to halt this, but then also they want the players to acknowledge that not everything, you know, you can't do everything, or you can't, no matter what you do, it doesn't necessarily mean you can stop from getting this disease or the virus. And then basically it's, you know, I have read, understand, and agree to comply with my Buckeye pledge above. And then, you know, you sign it. And if you're under 17, your parents sign it, because that's the way life is. If you're under 17, your parents sign pretty much everything. They sign a grade card. They sign field trip permission slips. This is the way it has always been. This is a new thing that everybody is going to have to be doing. You're going to be signing waivers for everything for the time being if you're taking part in stuff. And waivers have been around forever. If you're going to study abroad at Ohio State, you are signing a waiver acknowledging that it may not be the safest thing for you to do. So this is just one more thing, and it blew up way beyond what it needed to. And now we get to talk about it.
Anything to add to this one, Steve?
Yeah, I would echo what Tony just said. I think that it was more a case of we are going to give you the facts of the situation, which are there is no foolproof way to go about this. It is possible that you may become infected as part of this process, and just kind of going into it with both eyes open, an understanding of the risks that are involved. And again, these workouts are voluntary on their face, voluntary. We use name in quotes, but try and play if you don't show up. It's not that they'd hold it against you. It's just you'd be behind, probably behind the rest of the group in terms of your conditioning and everything else, because this is going to be very intensive as they get into it, obviously, with each passing day. So to me, I just feel it's been misportrayed, I think, by a lot of people in the media. I think that opinions are split as to whether or not this would hold up in a court of law as a, quote, waiver or an indemnity for the school or the football program or the coaches or anybody involved to be sued collectively or individually. It may or may not be. And, I don't think it's going to ever turn out to be a litigious thing anyway. I think if everybody can maintain the proper protocol, that I don't think we're in for any kind of negative result. Again, you can't foresee everything. When they get into the fall and figure that, there'll be 70,000 people on campus every day between students and staff members and faculty and people coming and going and delivering and whatever else, it's entirely possible that there's going to be some infection involved at some point on the campus, and managing that is going to be the biggest hurdle, it seems, at some point. So to me, I didn't feel that it was a negative thing. I thought it was a positive thing. I guess people are mistaking it for something that's negative, and in order to, again, prostitute the players and producing revenue for all the fat cat coaches and administrators. But I didn't necessarily see it that way.
I'm honored to talk Ohio State football with these three each and every week. I don't know any better than Steve Hellwag and Kevin Noon, Tony Gerdeman talking Ohio State football, and we do it each and every week. So, again, I hope you all appreciate, as I do, the time that they take out of their week to talk Buckeyes. I got to tell you guys that with the race relations issue that we've seen over the last several weeks, and obviously way before that and beyond that, it's part of life. But in concentrating on what's happened over the last few weeks and over the last several months, it's been COVID-19 and trying to be responsible and do the right things and talk about what's important. Yes, but I just can't wait just to talk about football. I can't actually wait. Usually I'm saying at this point of the year, I can't wait to watch football so that we can actually talk about what we watched. But at this point, I just want to talk about anything related to football. And so I guess that would be the College Football Hall of Fame at this point that released its initial list of candidates to be voted on. Cheryl, we'll hold off on your question because, man, what do I look like, Cheryl? I'm releasing schedule rankings every year, and you're asking Steve for the toughest and the easiest schedules in the country. But I release those rankings every year, which I may not do this year because you guys can imagine exhaustive process comparing 75 Power 5 schedules. But off the top of your head, Steve, since you're being pinpointed here, have you had a chance to look at any national schedules to determine weakest and hardest? The SEC West is usually a good place to look.
Yeah. For whatever reason, I don't know, it was out of boredom one day, I sat down with somebody's top 25, and I'm not even sure which one it was, probably ESPN's a while back or CBS's a while back, and I wrote down the name of every school, and then I went through each schedule and jotted in every time they were scheduled to play another top 25 school. I can tell you of the contenders, the easiest is without a doubt, once again, the Clemson Tigers, and their only scheduled game against the top 25 preseason team is, drum roll, November the 7th at Notre Dame, and it's already set 7:30 p.m. on NBC, one of the few games that we know for sure is scheduled for a time at this point, because the TV people have obviously held off on the rest of the schedule, at least the ESPN, CBS, ABC, Fox version of the Power 5 has been put off. And I think what this is about, just as a quick sidelight, is if Fox is paying extra money for the top choice, they want to make sure that they are picking a top choice scheme that is actually going to be played and not be postponed for whatever reason or canceled later on, and then whoop, there went your first choice. So I don't know when they're going to have a drop dead on this, because they're already 3 weeks now behind where they would start to pinpoint some of the early season games. But I would assume at some point we'll get something on that. So Clemson number one, or actually I would say the lowest of the top 25. I mean, Cincinnati's in here as well, and they don't really have a top 25 opponent this year. But, they're not Power 5. No one's really considering them for the championship. Of the schools that face the toughest schedules, you were right, Mark. The SEC West comes in here. Alabama has 5 of those opponents: USC, Georgia, LSU, Texas A&M, and Auburn. LSU also has 5 of those opponents, with Florida's its crossover, Texas, and then the other 3 in the division that we all know about: Alabama, Auburn, and Texas A&M. Those are probably, of the top contenders, the 2 toughest schedules. Auburn also has 5. They play North Carolina in kind of a tasty little week 2 game on September the 12th, so they have 5. Iowa, believe it or not, has 5, because they're playing Iowa State outside the conference. And then 4 of their conference opponents, Ohio State, Michigan, or rather Minnesota, Ohio State, Penn State, and Wisconsin, are all in the top 25. And the next rung down, Ohio State's there at number 4, or with 4 opponents that are top 25: Oregon, Iowa, Penn State, and Michigan. So those are the high points. Oklahoma. I mean, you look at the Big 12, all of them are going to have a guaranteed 4 top 25 opponents, because at least in the one that I'm looking at, there are 5 Big 12 teams in this top 25, with Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas, Baylor, and Iowa State. So there's 5 from the one conference, and they all play each other, so they're each guaranteed 4 games. And then if you go outside the conference and play a ranked team like Iowa State is with Iowa, they have 5 as well. So I don't see anybody with 6 right now, but from whatever top 25 this was that I looked at, to me it looks like Alabama, LSU, Auburn, some of those Big 12 teams, although Oklahoma only has 4, they're outside the conference game, is Tennessee, who is not quite in this top 25, but they're picked pretty good this year anyway, probably top 40. So that'll give you the nutshell on it. The ones that you think are up there, some SEC and Big 10 and a few Big 12. If you discount the fact that a couple of those ones are down toward the bottom of the top 25, and then Clemson, obviously easiest, with just 1 game against a top 25 opponent.
Any thoughts on scheduling, Kevin?
What? You talking to me?
Wake up, Kevin.
I was going to say 18 minutes in. No, I don't have any of the schedule in front of me or whatnot. I know that we love talking about the schedule at this point, and then we'll get to the end of the season. We'll be like, oh, well, that team wasn't worth its salt or whatnot. Generally, that's attached to Notre Dame most years, but I digress. It'll be interesting. I guess my biggest fear is that we don't have any like non-conference, which is something people are floating around as a potential caveat to how a season could go. Teddy Greenstein of the Chicago Tribune was saying that he'd spoken to somebody high up that said that he thought it was about 50-50 a season could go off, and one of the alternatives was 10 league games in 10 weeks or whatnot. So all these schedules that we're looking at could be all thrown out if they do make some drastic changes. So not real. I guess I'll start really diving into the schedules when I believe those will be the schedules.
I'm interested to find out, assuming the season goes on, what happens with us? What happens with the media? Do we get to travel to road games? How do you seat the press box if you're supposed to be socially distanced? Do we sit outside, which is fine in September and October? November, or at Illinois, I don't want it. It could be any time in Illinois. I don't want to be sitting outside.
I'll listen to the game in my car. I'll listen to the game in my car and then walk over to.
Yes, I mean there are so many unknowns right now, and we're still waiting to find out what is going to happen with Big Ten Media Days. Like, when is that going to be, and who knows what interview sessions. I saw somebody ask, when are we going to get to talk to players? Who knows? We may not be back in the Ohio State the building this year. It might all be Zoom calls or parking lot press conferences. I know we were hoping to talk to somebody this week, be it Ryan Day or anybody. That's a hope we have every week, and it doesn't often happen. The players are back, so it would be nice to touch base with some of them, because there are things to talk about. But maybe next week. That's what I say every week. Maybe next week we'll get to talk to players, and but yeah, that's what I think about the schedule, Mark.
My typical thoughts are, you look at the conferences, who's got the weakest conference? Well, until proven otherwise, it's been the ACC since 2017. So for 3 consecutive years, the ACC has been the worst conference, therefore typically has the worst schedules. But there's a number of teams out there that typically, the approach is to schedule tough outside of conference. I'll take USC, for example. They always play Notre Dame out of conference, and they tack on and go chase down somebody else like a Texas or an Alabama this year. So USC's got Alabama and Notre Dame if the schedule is played as it's been originally scheduled. If you want to go to the worst schedule in the country, typically outside of what the conference season may play out, go pick on Baylor. I pick on them every offseason because they never play anyone. Baylor has not played a ranked opponent non-conference since the mid-90s. It's basically Sam Houston State, Lamar, and Stephen F. Austin, and that's the Baylor schedule, and there you go. That's typically what they do, and there's a few others out there that are similar. But I think that the non-conference scheduling has actually gotten better, that there's certain programs for some reason have gone to now scheduling 2 difficult opponents, and more teams are doing that these days, and Ohio State's got some difficult double ups coming, most notably Texas, Washington in a few years as their non-conference slate 2 out of 3, and that's after scheduling 9 Big Ten games, of course. All right.
I want to jump in real quick there. I want to give credit to Wisconsin, who normally plays 2 tomato cans and a loaf of bread. They actually have Notre Dame on their non-con. And then they have App State, who we know what they did against Michigan. I mean, they're FBS now.
Capable.
And then the Salukis of Southern Illinois to keep up the tradition of, the 2 tomato cans and a loaf of bread. But at least they have Notre Dame on the schedule. So, I mean, they're a team that has been a perennial garbage schedule in the Big Ten.
Yes, they do. They many times will schedule nobody. It'll be South Florida, like it was last year, was their big game out of conference, and then nothing. But when Wisconsin takes the dive, they take the deep dive. It's Notre Dame this year as a home and home, well, kind of quasi home and home with LSU a few years ago. They played Alabama a few years ago. So when they go in, they go all in. I typically will make the comment that Iowa's got the most boring schedule in the Big Ten because they always play Iowa State. So who their big non-conference game is going to be. And then the other 2 are Miami of Ohio and some FCS.
Northern Iowa,
Northern Iowa.
No, Northern Iowa. So they stay in state. But actually, Iowa State would have the most boring schedule in the country because you don't even have to factor in who they might or might not play in conference, because they play everybody in conference. And then Iowa's their big non-conference game, and they don't play anybody else.
I'll just throw in one last tidbit off this analysis that I did as I just kind of totaled it up. And again, I don't remember whose top 25 I was using on this, but from this, the SEC has 6 of the top 14 teams, and that's kind of how it is almost every year at this time. And by the end of the year, there'll be about 4 in the top 15, but because they all play each other and beat each other. The Big Ten has 6 of the top 20. The Big 12 has 5 of the top 25. The ACC has the number 1 team with Clemson, and then the number 22 team with North Carolina. The Pac-12 has the number 6 team with Oregon and the number 21 team with USC, and that's it. So of the Power 5, those are the lesser 2. I think you can pretty much say. Notre Dame is at number 10 as an independent. Then there's 3 group of 5 in this, which is UC at 17, Boise State at 19, and Appalachian State at 24. So, and believe it or not, Appalachian State's playing at Wisconsin. So that could be a ranked game when it gets played in September. It'd be interesting.
Let me point the right way. Kevin had mentioned that. Yeah, difficult, kind of off the radar kind of game with App State going to Wisconsin. Absolutely. The Appalachian State beat North Carolina. We've touted North Carolina and their prospects for this year. They beat North Carolina and South Carolina last year, did App State. So pretty good work out of them. All right. I wonder what the count is for the College Football Hall of Fame. Sometimes you'll see these lists of what schools have produced the most Pro Football Hall of Famers, but I rarely see, maybe have never seen a list of College Football Hall of Famers. Ohio State has 3 on the candidates list for 2021's class, I guess, or 2020 class, with 2 recent stars in Michael Doss, of course, James Laurinaitis more recently than even Doss, and then going back to the late 70s, Chris Ward. Steve, we'll start with you.
Yeah, Mike Doss and James Laurinaitis are 2 of the 3-time All-Americans that Ohio State's had. There's only been a handful of them, maybe 8 or 9 in the school history, and that goes back, all the way to Chick Harley or whoever. So that in and of itself is pretty impressive. I don't think Doss ever won any of the major national awards like the Thorpe Award. I think Laurinaitis did win 1 or 2 of those national awards, whatever they may have been the Lombardi or the
Gursky, I thought.
Gursky, as maybe the top defensive player or one of the whatever it is. So that should factor in. The College Football Hall of Fame, to me, and I've only been following this since I took over my spot on this beat in 1995, is largely political, believe it or not. The National Football Foundation is the sponsor and the selector and everything else. Well, when Pat Fitzgerald got back into football at Northwestern as a coach, he became very involved with the National Football Foundation. And I think Pat Fitzgerald was phenomenal as a college football player. And I'm just pointing this out, that he went into the College Football Hall of Fame 10 years before Chris Spielman, who had played 10 years before Pat Fitzgerald. And there's no rhyme or reason for that. And I mean, as I say, Pat Fitzgerald, God bless him, great player, but didn't just I don't know. I don't want to say anything bad about Pat Fitzgerald, but Chris Spielman's one of the all-time greats, and you just look it up if you don't believe me. So
just to back up your point, Steve, a lot of people may not realize that Northwestern's most famed and gloried season, Pat Fitzgerald, great player on the team, but he got injured about halfway through the season. He didn't even play in the Rose Bowl or down the stretch for that team that particular year.
Yeah, as I say, he was heavily involved with the Chicago chapter of the National Football Foundation with the events that they have and everything annually there. And believe me when I tell you that certainly factored in his very quick induction. Whatever the cooling off period is after a guy's done playing, he was in pretty quick after that. Where it's taken guys from Ohio State who were all-time legends, decades to get in this thing. And this guy, just because he's on some committee with the Chicago chapter and the head coach at Northwestern, gets shoved right in there. So, I always kind of take it with a grain of salt. It took them a while to get some of the guys from Ohio State in there. And you figure at a school like Ohio State, they should average about 0.75 inductees a year, maybe 1 every other year or 2 every 3 years, something like that. If you're going to put 10 or 15 people in every year, you really do need to skew toward the programs that have actually won games and championships and played in historic matchups and these kind of things. And I don't know that it should have to do a whole lot with how you went on and played professionally. Most, if not all of the Heisman Trophy winners go in at some point. I assume Troy Smith will be in at some point as part of that. So, he's another one. I think it took Eddie George a while, I believe, to get his spot. And, again, that's just my recollection of following this, is it generally takes a few times on the ballot and probably somebody going to bat for you to get you in there, unless you've got some political oomph behind you, as that one instance I brought up. But Doss, I would say probably for him, national championship helps him. Laurinaitis, is he in the upper echelon of the great wide receivers or great linebackers who played at Ohio State? I'd say he's in the top 10. I don't know if he's in the top 3. I would say maybe he waits another year or two, but I definitely think at some point he'll be in.
I'm just going to say that it seems, I don't know if I've seen it written anywhere, but I don't think a lot of schools ever get players in back-to-back years. And because Keith Byers is part of the class of 2020, that's going to be going in December.
There's my example right there. It took Keith Byers 35 years to get it.
I'm not expecting anybody to get in this year just based on that, because honestly, you should have some of the blue blood programs that should have a lot more players in than, I think Ohio State has 26 plus 7 coaches that are part of the Hall of Fame right now. And, just to add to the James Laurinaitis, maybe where he ranks against Ohio State linebackers, but he did win the Nagurski in 06, the Buckeyes in 07, and then the Lott in 08. So he did win 3 major awards, along with being a 3-time consensus All-American. But, to echo Steve's point, it doesn't necessarily mean anything when it comes to how the College Football Hall of Fame votes. I mean, I know that everybody who's a member of the National Football Foundation gets a vote, but I don't know if that all is sort of like the fan vote for the Heisman, where you total all of that together and that's one vote, or how all of that necessarily works. And as a member of the NFF, I don't want to trash them or anything, but still don't really understand how we get to the end each year and how this ballot is put together.
Steve, I think the foundation's just concerned that Byers is going to show up with one shoe to the ceremony.
Yeah,
that might be the problem.
He's going to lose that other shoe at about the home 40-yard line, I think, and go the last 56 yards without it. Great player, obviously, and coulda, shoulda won the Heisman in 1984. I don't know, just the unfortunate way that all turned out. And, I wish I had done some show prep on this, but it just seems like even the guys who are in, it took an inordinate amount of time to get no-brainer type guys into the College Football Hall of Fame from Ohio State. And that's, as you look at who goes in year after year, it seems like they're scraping to find guys from some places to fill out classes or however you want to look at it. But I guess maybe that's something, if I studied up on it, I could come back with some real ammunition, in a week ahead. But that's my overall thought, is that I kind of take that Hall of Fame with a little bit of a grain of salt. That, and again, everything is apples to oranges. What era did you play in? Was your team any good? Did you play in any big games? Did you win any big games? Did you win your rivalry game? Did you win a bowl game? Did you win a national championship? I think some of that's got to go on your resume as well. When you talk about college football, which is, again, an 11 on 11, it's a team sport, and the object is to win big games and win championships. Were you part of that? Or, like a Barry Sanders, he was never in a situation like that at Oklahoma State or at the Detroit Lions. But you look at it and you see his resume, you say, oh, no doubt, first ballot. And, there you can make an exception for somebody like that. But I would prefer that we honor people who, played in the biggest games at the highest level of the sport.
And let's keep in mind, this is created or managed, submitted by the SIDs, who submit 3 names a year to the NFF or the College Football Hall of Fame. And I know Ohio State has kept Chris Ward on that list for years now because they believe he belongs. But they have been adding some new blood with Doss and James Laurinaitis You just wonder, are other SIDs doing that? Are they still holding out hope for somebody from 1972? Are they, ignoring some of the more recent guys, or do they have their own favorites? But yeah, it's SIDs putting 3 names on a list every year, and then seeing if those guys have enough oomph, enough backing to make it. And not everybody does. And James Laurinaitis, 3-time All-American, but when you talk about like the top 5, 6, 7, 8 linebackers, you have to go a ways before you get to him. Mike Doss, I think his name has kind of diminished a little bit since his time at Ohio State, because he didn't have the best NFL career, and maybe his game doesn't translate to what would be out there today, because he was a hard hitter and maybe had 1 or 2 mix-ups in coverage, but he was amazing back in his time. There's a reason he was a 3-time All-American, but it seems like maybe they have diminished in legend from the time they played, where maybe Keith Byers continues to grow because people at Ohio State still believe that Doug Flutie has his Heisman.
And when you bring up a Chris Ward or any interior lineman, especially on the offensive side where there are no statistics, and defensive line, there are statistics, but it doesn't really measure the performance level of especially interior linemen. I got to think that hurts them as you're further separated from their career. You've got to go on accounts of, who's going to sit there and analyze Chris Ward's game footage play by play to see how dominant he was, versus just going off of reputation and having accounts from competition and coaches during that time, because there's no statistical comparison to make.
Yeah, all they're doing is reading through the bio that the SID wrote. And so if you read Chris Ward's bio and it says he was part of these many offenses running for these many yards, and it's like, well, that's great, but this guy had more times and this guy ran for 4,000 yards, and it's just, we all like shiny things.
Yeah, exactly. That always fascinated me about Joe Thomas of the Cleveland Browns, who's going to be most likely a first ballot Hall of Famer at the NFL level. So he never played a significant game in his career. Not his fault. He played for losing teams across the board, but he was always considered the best. Not the best because you could look and see, he scored 1,500, gained 1,500 yards and scored, 18 touchdowns as a running back every year, just because everybody who played against him said, this guy's the best. And so he'd go to every Pro Bowl and all pro team, but there's nothing statistically to back that up. And he never played for good teams, played in big games, but he's going to be, I think that's a complete rarity. I can't come up with another example like that of a player that did not play significant games and did not play a skill position to where you could say, okay, he was a great running back, just played for bad teams, that is receiving that kind of Hall of Fame credentials and will be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
I just jumped on Ohio State's media guide on the internet, and I'll just run a couple names here. John Hicks was a Heisman finalist, like number 3 or 4 in the voting when John Cappelletti, I think, won the Heisman Trophy. Yeah, 73 perhaps. And he was a 2-time All-American. His final year was 73. He didn't go in until 2001. So that's, what would that be, 28 years. Jack Tatum, final year 1970. He didn't go in until 2004. 34 years for Jack Tatum, one of the great defensive backs in the history of the sport. Took him 34 years to get in, and he won a national championship at Ohio State. Took him 34 years. Rex Kern, took him 37 years. Quarterback of arguably 2 national championship teams, although nobody really considers 70 as a championship team. Took him 37 years. I told you about Fitzgerald. He got in 10 years. Spielman got in 21 years, 22 years by my math. So that doesn't add up.
Fitzgerald's the best coach in the Big Ten, though. Right, Tony?
Doesn't even begin to add up. Orlando Pace, final year 96. He finally gets in 2014. He should have been first ballot. 10 years, and it took him 18 years to get in. And Tom Cousineau, number 1 overall draft pick, 1978, his last year. It took him till 2016. Took him 38 years, it appears, to get into the college football. Number one overall draft pick took him 38 years to get into the College Football Hall of Fame. So I don't know what's wrong with this selection process, but, you know, again, take it. I guess you'd say it's really exclusive, but man, I don't, and there's a lot of no-brainers here from Ohio State that, you know, I could probably do a slideshow on the guys who ought to be in the College Football Hall of Fame that aren't.
Well,
Good
if you're not on
info
that
there,
list of
Steve.
three, if you're not on the list of three, I mean, it doesn't really matter if that's how it's worked through the years, and each school is submitting three, and for whatever reason, I mean, Ohio State obviously has more than three a year that need to go on, but you know, if Orlando Pace was sitting on the ballot for 8 years, I mean, if we're saying 10 years is kind of, I mean, I don't know all the criteria off the top of my head, how far out you have to be, but let's just say 10 years. You know, if he was sitting on that list for 8 years, that's, you know, that we need to get a congressional inquiry into that, because that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Orlando Pace should have been on that list as a junior.
True.
Tom Cousineau has to be the last big time draft pick who snubbed the NFL and went to Canada to play.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing back then. Looking at the years that they've had guys go in, since 2000, they've only had 3, 6, 8 guys go in the last 20 years. So it's, you know, and in this decade, 2012, 2014, and nobody since 2016 with some deserving guys. So that's 3 classes that have come and gone. Did they have anybody in this year?
Keith Byers is going in for 20. So
Okay,
and again, nowhere on there did we sit there and see the back-to-back thing. So that, again, I still don't believe anybody will get in for this class of 21 just based on the political ramifications.
Could be.
So you may have covered this, Steve, but is there a cap on how many players can be inducted per year?
No, but my recollection is it's usually between 10 and 15, something like that. I don't think it ever gets much bigger than 15. And it's usually like 5 or 6 coaches or contributors as well. So, yeah, I don't know if there is a cap on it, but I don't think a class ever gets much bigger than 12 to 15 players.
So who will be the next Ohio State person inducted? I say Urban Meyer.
Well, the ones, again, who are we talking about? Ward from years ago? I don't have I know he was an All-American. I don't have all of his dossier in front of me. The problem is the people selecting this, unless you played in the last 20 years, probably don't even know your name at this point, whoever's selecting it.
Well, you got a guy like Ted Ginn, who was amazing, but didn't have huge numbers, but there should be a continuous loop of his highlights playing in the College Football Hall of Fame at the very least.
Well, he's got a record. I mean, didn't he have most kick returns in a season or something there for a while? Or
yeah,
I don't
something
know if
like
his career record still stands, but you know, he's got records, and you make a good point. A lot of good flash in the pan type players like that who were really good for a couple years, but I know he made a few All-American teams as like the punt returner or whatever, but you know, I don't know. I would say Urban Meyer's probably got a good chance to get in before any of those 3 players, whatever year they take coaches.
Well, and you have to be a first-team All-American as well, right? And Ezekiel Elliott was never a first-team All-American.
You have to be a first-team All-American to make the College Football Hall of Fame?
I believe so.
Oh, my word.
You guys can check.
Yeah, and that's a great example. I mean, you think about what he did. He put that team on his back.
Yes.
And the American Athletic Amateur Union, AAU, gave him the Sullivan Award as the nation's top amateur athlete for the calendar year of 2014, based strictly on what he did in the last 4 games of the season. So
I'm all for guidelines, but let's not take it to the nth degree, because everything needs to be placed into context. I was going to bring up Antoine Winfield and Sean Springs, 2 of the best cover corner.
No doubt.
Infield,
No doubt.
was a complete player. My goodness, he was good.
No doubt.
But I don't know where they ranked as All-Americans. I know that they were given huge consideration, but I don't know.
I think both those guys were first-team All-Americans at one point.
But
Winfield
yes,
won the
we
tour.
talked about that like a month ago with the year Elliott had obviously coming down the stretch, didn't start early in the year, had the 3 consecutive 200-yard games in the playoffs in the Big Ten championship game versus Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, who else was it? Dalvin Cook. He got shoved off of those lists, but my goodness gracious, if that guy's not going to go to the College Football Hall of Fame.
He wasn't going to be an All-American in 2014 because it was selected before the postseason, whereas in 2015 he came back and rushed for almost 2,000 yards. And what was it? What we find out? LSU Leonard Fournier was up there, and maybe one or two others. So, he got edged out for the first team. I'm sure he was a second-team All-American, but
I don't think
whatever.
so, because in 2015 he had Derrick Henry and he had Christian McCaffrey were the 2 Heisman vote getters at 1 and 2.
Yeah, maybe I'm getting my years confused with another year.
So Kevin has updated us on what is on the docket in regards to, we had talked last week or the week before when it was announced when the NCAA meeting was being held to vote on the practice schedule, conditioning leading into fall camp. So it's expected to be announced soon based on a tweet from Ross Dellinger that the NCAA Council approved the 6-week preseason practice plan for football. Source confirms training to start in mid-July. And there are links and stories out there to follow up on that. But just released. Thank you, Kevin.
Yep. It'll be good to see some stuff going on with that. If you play a 0-week game, which Ohio State doesn't, they play a week 1 game that you could go as early as July 6th. But they'll move into the 20-hour work week as opposed to the 8 hours that they're at now with just strength coaches. And then, according to that original story, as long as everything goes according to plan, first week of August, it looks like is when fall camps will open up.
Isn't it great? We started this show talking about Teddy Greenstein reporting that there was a 50-50 that the season was even going to happen. And within an hour, we have confirmation that the season it looks like it's going to be all right. So, we can do anything here with this show.
We're talking about practice, man. Talking about practice.
Not talking about a gain. Not talking about a gain.
Well, just this week, I was blamed for Florida State's poor football attendance in recent years and for the criticism that Jim Harbaugh receives. Somebody gave me that type of power that I was the source. I was, in capital letters, the source of those 2 topics in college football. You
have long been known as a Harbaugh hater and a Gator hater. So I would, being a person on the internet, I believe most things that I read. And so if I were to see that, I would believe that.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown of being the voice of college football.
I guess. I never looked at the downside of that. So
you did that.
Somebody else served up that name, and I thought, man, that's a good one to go with. Let's grab that and go with it. All right. Ohio State football talk here each week. So you need to subscribe to the channel to turn on the bell for the notifications. Therefore, when we're going live, not just with this show, but every show, because schedules are what they are and people are busy. So we got Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove on Rivals next to me. Please join him there to get yourself set for the season, as well as Steve Hillwagon from Bucknuts pointing out everybody that's on the show here. And you got one more if you can coordinate. I always get it wrong. There we go. There's Kevin, Steve, and then Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop. So check out those. These guys keep me informed, I tell you. So, if it's anything that's going on right now, that's where I need their help. If we're going to talk about 1995, I can do that all day, but I got to keep track of what's going on now. And I regularly keep track of what these 3 guys put on their Twitter feed and write in keeping track of Ohio State football. So please lock it in with them. And again, appreciate what they bring here each and every week. Is there anything we missed? We usually have some recruiting news, but I don't know that there's anything out there that's worth talking about this week.
Did anybody want to say anything about Mike Gundy?
I gotta go.
I gotta go.
I have my thoughts about it. I almost posted a video, but I just had too much else going on.
We need a commissioner is what we need. Somebody that's got the ability to sit somebody down for a couple of games for being a unenlightened adult would be the, in parenthesis, unenlightened adult would be what you'd put, that why he has to sit out for 2 games. Because, again, he's got the right, certainly, to support, wear whatever he wants, say whatever he wants, I guess. But at the same time, I think that when you are in a position, it doesn't make any sense when you're in a position that you are, that you would take a position like that. And again, it just falls back under the, we got to flow this money through this state by prostituting these kids. And, it just doesn't ring true. I don't know how you can recruit anybody to come play at your school when you have this, or the Iowa situation, the same thing. How can you as a coach, or you as even a guy on the team, say, oh yeah, come here, it's great, and then kind of suppress the idea, yeah, but when you get here, they're going to treat you like a second-class citizen, which is kind of the big secret that everybody kept for a long time at Iowa, it seems like. So I don't know. It just, to me, people just show their lack of intelligence when they get caught up in situations like this. And I have wanted to tweet any number of things over the years and say different things over the years publicly on message boards and wherever. And sometimes the best message is the one you don't send. And don't put yourself in that position. Don't take a stand on something that is, maybe you believe it, maybe you're just trying to say something humorous or funny, and it's just gonna backfire in your face. You just have to watch when you're in the public eye. Everything you do and say needs to be letter perfect. And this is that time, this is that place where you really have to watch what it is you say and what you do. And if you don't, there's grave consequences. I mean, we've seen people lose jobs over stuff like this. They fired the guy at Iowa, the strength coach. He was the scapegoat. They didn't fire Kirk Ferentz. They fired the strength coach. They're not going to fire Mike Gundy, because then you're in a court battle, for years trying to figure out what you owe him. Was he fired for cause, etc.? And it's all a gray area. So I don't know. I mean, you look at Dabo Sweeney. I mean, when going back on Gundy, and again, he didn't show any kind of contrition, didn't show any kind of remorse over the whole situation. And they made Hubbard feel bad for bringing it to the public light, is how I kind of came away from it. And I don't know.
So educate and inform me between the 3 of you on this one, because this is what I know. And maybe I'm missing something here because I didn't do the deep dive on it. Mike Gundy goes on a fishing trip. There's a picture taken of him. He's got a news network, OAN, on his shirt. I know next to nothing about this network. I don't watch it. I know they're conservative. I know that I've got a few people in my life that vouch for it as a legitimate news network, but I don't know. So that's where all this started, right? There was nothing else involved. Just him having he could have had CNN on his shirt, or MSNBC or Fox News or whatever. And then Chuba Hubbard gets all bent out of shape over that. And then suddenly there's other things going on in the program. So had he not worn this shirt and had a picture, the program evidently would have been fine, but there were things going on with the program that needed to be changed suddenly because there was a t-shirt worn on a picture.
I don't know this.
I don't follow.
I don't know this completely, but as I understand it, that network may have aired programming where they were kind of lampooning the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that's what rubbed people the wrong way. And maybe it was brought to the attention of the players that you can't abide this. Your coach is wearing something that a network that has worked against the Black Lives Matter cause, or maybe made pointed commentary about how it's misguided or whatever it may be. And again, I'm just, without firsthand knowledge, I think that's what's come up in the discussion, is that they haven't been, of the networks, they've been the least receptive to the idea, perhaps, of Black Lives Matter. So that may be.
But I'm guessing that Shula Hubbard doesn't know this. I don't know.
Maybe
it doesn't take long to find out on Twitter.
Yeah,
you know, that was pretty quick.
Second issue is that why does everything have to be out in public? I hear this rhetoric all the time about we're a family, we're a brotherhood, and all this business. Well,
until
if
we're
my
not.
son does something I don't like, do I throw him under the bus on Twitter, or my best friend or my brother? No, I go talk to them.
Mark, do you know how many people we have all had to, over the years, mute on Facebook because they are detailing every instance of my wife and I had another argument and she's been cheating, and and this, my cousin was cheating, and like that's what people do. They put it all out there for everybody. So, when by now a 20-year-old has grown up with that. They've been doing it. Facebook has been around for a decade, more than that, and so is Twitter. So this is, I get what you're saying. Like,
and I don't want to
in-house
him because he's not alone. Yeah. And that's what's done now. The Florida State players did the same thing with Mike Norvell instead of, I just don't get that. I just don't understand that. And it's supposed to be such a brotherhood and family. That's
but maybe stuff like that has happened.
We're a brotherhood. We're a family. But we're going to sell one of you out on social media as soon as we just don't like something. We didn't talk to you. We may misinterpret what's going on here, but we're just going to throw it out for the world to see.
I could say maybe things like that have happened in-house and nothing has happened from it. And so
that were the case.
Then this is the escalated step of that, and clearly, something's happened. Coaches, wearing whatever they want, that's fine. Just realize that it's also about recruiting and presenting a place that is welcoming to players. And if you don't have that, then they're going to go. And so if you don't want to be part of that, if you don't want to be part of that presentation as the head coach, okay, but you're not going to be the great recruiter, or you're not going to find players as welcoming and wanting to join you as possible if you don't give them a place that feels welcoming to them.
Absolutely. So what's morally correct, or the ethics of it, doesn't always line up with what's just smart business. The NFL is doing smart business right now. They did different smart business. They could care less. I'm not talking about every individual inside the NFL. There are caring individuals everywhere. But as an organization, all they care about is the money rolling in and the fans showing up and turning on the TVs. So that slant and that lean publicly in the public square is different today than it was in 2016 in the NFL. Their moral judgment is no different today than it was 3 years ago. They're just smart business people. And that's what I have a problem with, that they suddenly, and not just the NFL, everybody takes a moral high ground and says, oh, well, we're doing the right thing. No, you're not. No, you're not necessarily doing the right thing for the right reasons. You haven't taken a moral stand. You've taken a business stand. There's nothing wrong with that. Just don't tell us that.
Yeah. Say one thing and do another, that type thing, and try to put your best foot forward for public relations and recruiting purposes. But again, those players that are in the program know what you're really all about. So when we saw those guys from Iowa come out and make comments, and the other players from Oklahoma State come out and say, yeah, there's some things that need to be fixed there, then, that's when you can take it to the bank that something's wrong. And I think in any of these programs, there's going to be people who don't get to play, who are disgruntled, maybe feel they didn't get the right injury or academic support or coaching or support, or however you want to put it. They'll always have an axe to grind or a bone to pick. So sometimes you have to take some of it with a grain of salt. But I think when there's more, when there's a cacophony, like we think it was last Friday, we talked about the Iowa situation when it became one guy and then two guys and then five guys and whatever, one or two guys is an isolated problem. 5 to 10 guys is you've got a major systematic issue. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I would rate it.
Very good. Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop, and also Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove. It's always appreciated, guys. Great conversation. And we're getting closer and closer to football, roughly 72, 73 days from what might be week 0 if we get a football season on time. As Kevin outlined, workouts, conditioning approved for July 6th. And I believe that was the week 0 games, correct? And then they'd go to camp on the 24th and everybody else a week later.
I had the story up. The NC2A finally put something out. Then about they could starting 8 hours conditioning and film review per week, not more than 2 hours from July 13th to the 23rd. Then from the 24th through the 6th, they can go up to 20 hours. And preseason practice could begin August 7th with a 5-day acclimatization period. But, that's on the media contact release that's been put out. I'm sure more details will come out here, soon.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Again, Steve, Kevin, Tony, thank you so much. Appreciate it. You guys have a great rest of your week.
Absolutely.
You too. All right.
Thanks.